Following the death of the founder of the Society of African Missions, the Venerable Melchior de Marian Bresiac in 1859, along with 4 members of the Infant Society in Freetown, Sierra Leone, West Africa, there were only 3 priests, 2 brothers and 3 students left at home in Lyons, France, to carry on the work of evangelization in Africa. They were determined to do this. Thanks to God's grace, the wise guidance, faith and fortitude of Father Augustin Planck, who was the successor, friend, confidant and closest collaborator of the founder, and the growing interest and support of the French lay Catholics for the missions in Africa, a steady stream of young Frenchmen were ordained priests of the Society. 30 of them were working in Africa within 11 years after the tragedy of Freetown, Sierra Leone. But now, a new challenge had emerged. There was an urgent need for English-speaking missionaries to work in the British colonies in Africa. The fledgling French-speaking SMA had been assigned 2 vast territories by the Holy See in Rome, namely Nigeria and South Africa. Both were seen as English-speaking. Certainly, they had English-speaking administrations. The need for English-speaking missionaries was acute and urgent. In addition to this challenge, where could the SMA leadership find the necessary personnel and finances to undertake the formation of students and the other expenses involved in any proposed expansion of the society? Enter the Irish.
An unforeseen and what might be described as a providential situation arose when an Irish priest, Father O'Hare, offered to initiate an SMA missionary movement in Ireland. He had been ordained in All Hallows College, Dublin in 1863 and was ministering in South Africa. He knew and admired the work of some SMA missionaries who were working near him in Cape Town. An added motivation was the fact that Father O'Hare recently had a disagreement with his own local superior, Bishop Leonard, and was determined to move on. Father Planck was duly informed by his confreres in South Africa and agreed to send Father O'Hare to Ireland. Father Planck wrote a letter in 1876 to Father O'Hare outlining the nature and the purpose of the Society of African Missions and the urgent need for vocations and financial resources. Father O'Hare set about his new mission with enthusiasm. Within 6 months, he had sent a few students to the SMA in Lyons and facilitated the sending of some postulants to the Sisters of Our Lady of Apostles, OLA, a congregation founded by Father Planck himself. The seminarians found seminary life difficult, and for a variety of reasons, most did not persevere. This reinforced the already widespread view of SMA superiors in Lyons that the Irish were not suitable or up to the mark for working on missions to the so-called pagan peoples of Africa. This, however, did not deter Father O'Hare. He continued with his publicity campaign on behalf of the SMA, making repeated reference to the great missionary tradition of the Island of Saints from the 6th to the 9th centuries. Funds began to trickle in, but he soon realised that he needed a permanent base in Ireland. He chose Cork, and with the permission of Bishop Delaney, he rented a house called Lochview, which was situated on the old Youghal Road on the north side of the city. Father O'Hare also soon realised that there was need to prepare students before sending them to the seminary in France. He informed Father Planck that it was necessary to establish an apostolic school in Ireland, that is, a secondary school for boys who wished to become SMA priests. Father Planck agreed. He had seen this type of school was needed in Spain and even in France.
The Ireland of the 1870s was emerging from the era of penal laws, and the church authorities were preoccupied with internal organisation, with financial matters, with education, with church building, and of course with pastoral care. And this pastoral care was not just for the Catholics within Ireland, but it was extended pastoral care to Great Britain, the United States, Australia, and other countries abroad, shall we say, out of Ireland. Indeed, several seminaries had been constructed specifically for that purpose. And there is no doubt whatever that the Irish diaspora, both lay and clerical, have made a tremendous contribution to evangelization and to the growth of the Catholic Church in countries outside Ireland. It was this mission to the Irish diaspora that the bishops and clergy and laity understood as foreign missions. That was their understanding at that time. Now, getting back to SMA, after a couple of years, Father Planck began to have doubts about the capability and indeed the temperament and general suitability of Father O'Hare. He felt that he mightn't be the man to lead the SMA project in such a complex environment. So Father Planck also had concluded from the few years that they were dealing with aspirants that they needed preparation before going to the major seminary in Lyons. They needed what he called proper formation. And of course, it was to ensure this that he sent one of his experienced assistants, a Father Poirier, SMA, to assess the situation in 1878. And Father Poirier quickly reported. He reported back within a month to Lyons.
Father Planck acted immediately. He decided to send a French confrere, Father Francois Devoucoux, and a senior seminarian, Deacon Claude Pagnon, SMA, to the Cork House. Father Devoucoux would be superior of the entire project in Ireland. In his letter of appointment, Father Planck reminded Father Devoucoux that the Cork House must remain completely subject to Lyons, now and in the future. When there are savings, they are not to be invested in the name of the Cork House, but in that of the Mother House, to forestall any ideas of setting up independently. The Apostolic Secondary School should go ahead, and the students should be given proper schooling. It opened its doors at Elm Grove, Ballyvolane, just a few hundred yards from the originally rented property on the old Youghal Road. The date was September 1878. Half a dozen students were accepted. In the 2 years since he had come to Ireland, Father O'Hare had made good progress in spite of many obstacles. But now, with the arrival of Father Devoucoux and Deacon Pagnon, he became unsettled and unhappy. He felt sidelined by the latest moves from Lyons. He decided that he should withdraw from the project. A commentator has described Father O'Hare as a remarkably persuasive man, personable, well-spoken, enthusiastic, and as having a great gift with words. The fact of the matter was that in some ways O'Hare was a man before his time. He used the media to advertise for recruits, and sometimes his articles and advertisements were written with a flourish and directness which offended the more delicate sensibilities of his clerical readers. In any event, complaints reached Lyons. The last we know of him was that he was advertising in the British Catholic press for support to organise a Catholic colony in the Transvaal, South Africa. Father O'Hare had made a significant contribution to bringing the Society of African Missions to Ireland. Father Devoucoux SMA, who took over from Father O'Hare, was a quiet, retiring man with a poor command of English. He was also small in stature, lean and slender, somewhat nervous and generally in poor health. Ordained in August 1870, he had given missionary service in the Cape of Good Hope, Benin, Egypt, and in the Apostolic School in Bugado, Spain. He came to Ireland in 1879, 7 years after his ordination.
It was that same year, 1879, that another Irish priest, Father John Baptiste Barrett, SMA, was ordained a priest in Cork. Notes in the SMA necrology state that although he was one of the major figures in the foundation of the Irish province, details about his background and life are scarce. Born in Westport, County Mayo in 1844, he was educated in Leeds and Rugby. He spent 10 years as a teacher and secretary of a secondary college in York. In February 1877, he entered the SMA Major Seminary in Lyon, studied theology, and became a member of the Society on the 14th of June 1878. Shortly afterwards, he left for Cork, where he was ordained a priest, possibly on the 26th of July 1879, although there is some evidence to show that the date of his ordination may have been later that year. Immediately, Father Barrett SMA was assigned to England to collect money for the society, returning later to Cork, where he would continue his fundraising work. He appears to have had a wide range of contacts among the clergy and laity, and was generally held in high regard. An early historian of the Irish province, Father Michael Collins SMA, who knew Father Barrett, states that Father John lived apart from the community because of ill health. During John's time in England, he contacted Mr. Thomas Hinsworth, a Yorkshire farmer who donated 4 or 5 buses for the training of students, and also made available substantial funds for the building of the Society's church, later on at Blackrock Road, Cork. We also know that Father Barrett continued promotion work on behalf of the Irish branch of the SMA, acting discreetly through personal contacts and private calls. A particularly important bequest was that of the Mrs. Coleman of York Hill, Cork and Youghal. This money was placed in trust for the Irish branch of the SMA by Father Barrett. It is clear that these funds were critical in the setting up and the survival of the province in the early years of its existence. Father John Baptiste Barrett, SMA, died in 1910 and is buried in St. Joseph's Cemetery, Cork. It was due to the promotional work of Father James O'Hare and of Father John Baptiste Barrett that Father Devaku had sufficient funds in hand to move quickly, quietly and efficiently in making 2 valuable acquisitions. The first was buying the lease of a large city cemetery which was held by the Capuchin order in the south side of Cork City. This was known at the time as the Botanical Gardens. Later, it was renamed St. Joseph's Cemetery. This purchase was a valuable source of continuing revenue, as clients were guaranteed. The second purchase, which was made a little later, was a plot of land, a 4-acre site on the Blackrock Road where Father Devaku would build an apostolic school and a church. Meanwhile, the small team of Fathers Devaku, Barrett, and the recently ordained Father Claude Pagnon continued to live simply and got on with the work. Mainly by advertisements, Father Devaku tried to get students for the missionary priesthood and girls for the Sisters of Our Lady of Apostles. Within 2 years, 1880 to 1881, a college and the well-designed stone-built church were erected at Blackrock Road, Cork.
Before the completion of the church, Father Devaku sought permission from the Bishop of Cork to allow his SMA church to be open to the public. Some of the Catholic lay faithful had become accustomed to attending Mass at the previously rented houses and wished to continue in his new church. This permission was refused. According to another historian, Father Patrick Gantley, SMA, the missionaries were strongly supported by the people, but they were resented by some of the clergy, who saw them as competitors for funds and vocations. The clerical hostility had something to do with Father O'Hare's unorthodox approach, something to do with the intrusion of foreigners, but more to do with the general lack of interest in pagan missions in the Church in Ireland at that time. Planck, trying to smooth things over, he wrote a friendly, rather flattering letter to the bishop and told Devereux not to press his case in regard to the church, but to bide his time. Father Devereux, while obeying this directive, he was deeply affected by the open opposition which he was encountering in Cork. This was added to his own preconceived ideas, and which were now confirmed. He wrote to Father Planck on the 23rd of September 1880 that the Irish were lacking a missionary spirit, and that the Apostolic School in Cork should really be a secondary affair, a name only, and you ought to give the house another purpose. While Father Planck was aware of Father Devereux's talents, but also of his tendency towards depression, indifferent health and lapses in diplomacy, he had begun to feel the same way about the project in Cork. This was based on his own observation of the students who had come to Lyons and on the report he was receiving from Africa about the few Irish SMAs there. This was also partly the reason why he recalled the recently ordained Father Claude Pagnon from Cork and assigned him to the French-speaking mission in Benin, even though the young priest had requested to be sent to Lagos, Nigeria.
After some reflection, Father Planck decided to downgrade the Cork Foundation. He sent a letter to Father Devereux in which he agreed that another purpose should be given to the Cork House. In future, it would be utilised as a house in which French SMA members would acquire a working knowledge of the English language, which was becoming more and more necessary in the vast regions of West Africa. They would attend the Apostolic School for this purpose. At the same time, a reduced number of local candidates for the society would be maintained at the school to forestall objections from the local church. This transition should be done gradually and quietly. Of course, funds would still be gathered for the work of the society. At the end of 1882, however, Father Devereux felt that he could no longer continue in his post in Cork. Father Planck pretty readily agreed to his request for a transfer. He had come to realise that both Fathers Devereux and himself had not given sufficient attention to winning the interest and confidence of the laity, the clergy, and especially the hierarchy of Ireland. It was necessary to remedy this and to build upon what was already achieved. Father Devereux left for France shortly after Christmas and was assigned to the Gold Coast on the 13th of January 1883. He died in Lyon on the 17th of April 1930. Father Francois Devereux SMA has been described as a sincere and dedicated worker who in a short time provided the society with a large school and church in Ireland. His place in Cork was taken by the Swiss-born Father Joseph Zimmerman, SMA.
Joseph Zimmerman was born into a farming community in Weggis in Switzerland in 1849. He was the second of 10 children, and after secondary school he studied philosophy and science at the University of Innsbruck. In 1873 he entered the diocesan seminary at Mainz, but after hearing a talk from an SMA priest, he decided to become a missionary and was ordained for the SMA on the 29th of September 1876. Father Joseph taught for 4 years in the SMA seminary in Lyons, and after a visit to the Society's mission in West Africa, he began collecting funds in Alsace and in other German-speaking countries. He was good at this work, eloquent, persuasive, and not easily put off by the obstacles which missionary collectors usually experience. In 1883, due to the difficulties with the development of the SMA branch in Ireland and getting suitable vocations for the Society's English-speaking West African fields, Father Joseph arrived in Ireland to try to improve things. As already noted, the SMA leadership in Lyons was considering a withdrawal from Ireland, but Father Zimmerman had other ideas. He quickly saw that the Spiritans, a missionary society with an educational dimension, had won acceptance because of its impeccable credentials in the field of education. The SMA, in contrast, had come empty-handed and was perceived as a typical French organisation, bent on collecting funds and priestly vocations. Father Zimmerman concluded that if the Irish branch was to have any prospect of success, it would have to shed its perceived French characteristics. Consequently, he developed a strategy which was to radically change the direction of the Irish branch of the SMA. From its inception, the Irish branch had raised considerable funds both in Ireland and England, and these funds were sent to Lyons. Father Zimmerman resolved to do everything to ensure that these monies and the proceeds from further collections would stay under the control of the Irish branch. Furthermore, he was determined to seek authorization from Rome for the training of candidates in Ireland rather than in Lyons, and for their subsequent assignment to mission fields entrusted to the Irish branch and administered from Ireland. The key to the success of Father Zimmerman's strategy was his capacity to win support from the bishops and diocesan clergy. During the early years, he sought to establish the good reputation of the Society in the Diocese of Cork and gain acceptance for his community. Eventually, his efforts bore fruit, assisted in no small way by the arrival of the missionary-minded Father Thomas O'Callaghan O.P. as Bishop of Cork in 1886. Thereafter, Joseph Zimmerman set about cultivating leading figures in the Irish Church, suggesting that the time was ripe for the inauguration of an indigenous missionary enterprise to non-Christian peoples. Father Zimmerman's advocacy of an Irish enterprise was particularly appropriate because by the closing decade of the century, the Irish Church had solved most of its domestic problems. The task of eternal reorganisation was almost complete. The education question was well in hand, and the diaspora communities were producing their own clergy in increasing numbers. In all contexts, Father Zimmerman emphasised his desire to bring to birth a distinctively Irish movement which would revive the glories of Ireland's illustrious missionary past. Eventually, in 1902, his efforts were rewarded when Bishop O'Callaghan and Bishop Robert Brown of Cloyne, with the blessing of Cardinal Logue of Armagh, agreed to become trustees of the branch's funds. Later, in 1905, a second trust involving Archbishop John Healy of Tuam, a historian who was greatly attracted by the prospects of an Irish missionary renaissance, was established. The formation of the trusts made the Irish funds secure, but their significance went deeper. With the participation of the bishops, a policy of direct episcopal involvement in the affairs of the Irish branch was initiated. It signified that the pagan missionaries' cause was now no longer a matter of peripheral interest to Irish bishops. And from the start, Bishop of Callahan was impressed by the personal and priestly qualities of Father Zimmerman, the SMA superior. As an early token of his approval, he permitted 3 things in which the previous bishop had not agreed. He allowed the SMA to raise funds in the diocese. He opened the SMA church in Blackrock Road for the public, and he granted Father Zimmerman the right to hear confessions in the diocese. Well acquainted with the Church's efforts to evangelize non-Christian peoples through his contacts with Propaganda Fide in Rome, Bishop O'Callaghan was immediately receptive to Father Zimmerman's proposal for an Irish movement. He was also convinced that the Swiss priests could provide the necessary leadership.
Scarcely less important to the success of the Zimmerman project was the support of a wealthy Catholic layman, Lieutenant Colonel Llewellyn Blake. Unlike the Spiritans, whose fee-paying schools provided some income, the SMA was wholly dependent on private donations. During the first 15 of the 28 years he spent in Cork, Father Zimmerman was compelled to devote much of his time and energy to fundraising in Ireland, England and America. However, the amount was insufficient for the comprehensive training program for students, which Father Zimmerman's scheme required. Lieutenant Colonel Blake gave substantial financial support and later made over his estates in Mayo and Galway as houses of training. Because there were a large number of students in the Society's secondary school at Blackrock Road, and as Sisters of Our Lady of Apostles were also being accommodated there, Father Zimmerman began to look around for an additional suitable property. Finally, in July 1888, he bought a fine, if dilapidated, Georgian house and some 14 acres of land from a Mr. James O'Connor at Wilton in the west of the city. Renovations commenced immediately to the old coach house, which served as a chapel, and a dormitory and study rooms were quickly constructed. On the 23rd of March the following year, 1889, the students packed their bags and baggage on carts and transferred from Blackrock Road to the new college. On the next day, Sunday 24th, Mass was said for the first time there by a Father Michon, the Director of Students. The college at Blackrock Road was then transferred to the Ole Sisters, where they remained until 1909. They moved to their present convent at Ardfoyle, a short distance away, in 1910. The construction of the church in Wilton began in September 1894. It was built of Cork limestone, quarried at Ballintemple. The church, which is dedicated to St. Joseph, was blessed and opened by Bishop O'Callaghan on the 14th of December 1897. A commentator has remarked, the church would never have been built without the benefaction of Llewellyn Blake of Ballinafad, County Mayo. He is buried outside the sanctuary wall of the church.
Lieutenant Colonel Blake's intervention was an important factor in the winning of the support of Ireland's cardinal and bishops. His advocacy, both in Irish clerical circles and in Rome, of a distinctly Irish enterprise, free from continental control, won that concept of measure of acceptance which Father Zimmerman, despite his exceptional powers of persuasion, could never have achieved alone. Within 3 years of Blake's intervention, Father Zimmerman was able to raise the number of students attending the branch's secondary school to 50, and was also catering for 35 French priests who taught in the school, learned English, or simply convalesced after tours of duty in Africa. In addition, he was able to see to the needs of a community of between 25 and 30 missionary sisters of the Congregation of Our Lady of Apostles, which he had first introduced to Ireland in 1887.
In 1905, Father Zimmerman travelled to Rome to inform Propaganda Fide that the time was ripe for the development of an Irish pagan mission enterprise, and that the Irish branch of the SMA was eminently suited to do this. He requested that the SMA headquarters in Lyons should be instructed to authorise the Irish branch to train its candidates for priesthood in Ireland, and that specially designated mission territories should be confided to the Irish branch. He argued that Egypt, under British control since 1883, would be an appropriate location for such an enterprise because French missionaries were no longer acceptable there. Added to the petition were letters from Cardinal Logue, Bishop O'Callaghan, Archbishop Healy, Bishop Brown, and other leading ecclesiastics, declaring support for these projects and expressing confidence in Father Zimmerman. Through the good offices of Father Thomas Crotty, O.P., Prior of San Clemente, who had been enlisted by Bishop O'Callaghan, O.P., Father Zimmerman obtained interviews with Cardinal Mary del Val and other influential officials in the Vatican. On the other hand, the Society's leadership in Lyons was not happy with all this. They requested that Father Zimmerman be withdrawn from Ireland. Officials at Propaganda Fide, in an effort to compromise, rejected Father Zimmerman's petition, but informed SMA headquarters that Father Zimmerman's recall would be inopportune, in view of the wide measure of support he commanded from within the Irish clergy. Between 1907 and 1910, Father Zimmerman was to make 4 further excursions to Rome, bearing impressive dossier containing submissions of the type already described. An important addition was the petition for provincial status for the Irish branch of the SMA. These submissions were already armed with numerous letters of recommendation from his Irish supporters. The SMA superiors in Lyons, now led by Bishop Pelle, SMA, as Father Planck had died on 21st of August 1907, continued to dispatch its own representatives to Rome, arguing against the Irish position and seeking the consent of Propaganda Fide to Father Zimmerman's recall. While acknowledging his competence in financial and administrative matters, they had serious reservations about Father Zimmerman's ability to form good priests or to provide them with good spiritual guidance. It is also understandable that they harboured fears about a scheme which might breach the unity of the society.
By 1910, the affair had become something of an embarrassment at Rome, and the Holy See could no longer procrastinate. In July of that year, Rome decided that the Irish branch should be raised to provincial status with a large measure of autonomy, and that it should be allowed to train priests, retain funds, and be assigned special mission territories. At the same time, Rome agreed to Father Zimmerman's recall, and further, Rome awarded the new SMA province the extremely hazardous mission of Liberia instead of Egypt. Now, the reaction of the Irish hierarchy to Father Zimmerman's removal was even greater than Propaganda Fide had anticipated. Many of the bishops made strong representations to have the decision reversed. And Father Zimmerman himself, believing that his work was incomplete, made every effort to stay at his post, even orchestrating a series of petitions from lay supporters, including Lieutenant Colonel Llewellyn Blake. But Rome remained firm. That is, the Irish province of the SMA should be established in Ireland, and Father Zimmerman could be recalled by the Society's leadership in Lyons. Father Zimmerman, SMA, was withdrawn in 1910, and Father Stephen Kine, an Irish SMA member who was trained in Lyons, he was recalled to Ireland from his work in Liberia. He was nominated by the Superior General and Council of the SMA as the first Provincial Superior of the SMA Irish Province on the 15th of May 1912.
Father Joseph Zimmerman, SMA, was reassigned to the Society's mission among African Americans in Savannah, Georgia, in 1911. He would spend the last 10 years of his life there, ministering to the African American community in St. Anthony's Parish. It must be said that his heart never left Ireland. The ordinary people of Cork also continued to remember Father Zimmerman. In 1982, a well-known journalist with the Cork Evening Echo, Walter McGrath, wrote on the occasion of the 40th anniversary of the election of the Irish province. There was nothing affluent about him. One abiding memory is of a rather shabbily dressed, bearded priest trundling around the streets of Cork in a donkey and cart, seeking alms for the missions. That same year, Father John A. Craven, SMA, wrote about Father Zimmerman. From his life story, there emerges a pioneer, a visionary, an eminently practical person, adroitly using every means to promote his mission, a man of great faith and deep piety, on the human level capable of warm and lasting friendships. He needed such sterling qualities. His tragedy was that the achievement of his life goal brought him exile from the land and the society he loved so well. Father Zimmerman always kept in touch with the new SMA administration in Ireland, offering advice when requested. It is clearly a sign of the esteem and gratitude of his SMA successors in Cork that in 1918, at the first SMA Provincial Assembly, he was officially invited to return to Ireland to spend his remaining years among his confreres, people, and the church for whom he had laboured for so long and so well. Father Zimmerman was pleased, and having received permission from his superiors in Lyons, gratefully accepted. All parties involved had now come to the knowledge that Father Joseph Zimmerman was the founder of the Society of African Missions in Ireland. Regrettably, Father Zimmerman's health had seriously deteriorated early in 1921, and his physicians strongly advised him not to travel. He died in St. Anthony's Parish, Savannah, Georgia, USA, on the 19th of July, 1921. He was 72. On the 19th of July, 2021, exactly 100 years after his death, the SMA Irish Provincial Superior, Father Malachy Flanagan, solemnly unveiled a memorial to the founder of the Irish SMA Province in the SMA Cemetery at Wilton, Cork.
Heavenly Father, be present with us this afternoon as we dedicate this stone in memory of Father Joseph Zimmerman, founder of the Irish province of the Society of African Missions. Like St. Patrick, Father Zimmerman was sent to Ireland to preach the gospel and to invite the Irish people to spread this good news to others. Through the support of Irish people, lay and clerical, you blessed his efforts in building up the Irish branch of the SMA. Today we give thanks to God for the rich harvest that is the Church in Africa 100 years after his death. In dedicating this stone to him, we also recall with gratitude the lives of all our missionaries, particularly members of the SMA and Sisters of Our Lady of Apostles. As we pray for the happy repose of the soul of Father Zimmerman, we remember all our deceased missionaries, and especially those who are buried in this cemetery. May the Lord grant them and all our deceased family members and supporters eternal rest.
Father Zimmerman's importance for the missionary movement of the 20th and 21st centuries in Ireland extends beyond his work on behalf of the SMA as a vehicle for such a movement. During his 28 years in Ireland, he played a major role in persuading leading churchmen that the time had come to inaugurate an Irish missionary enterprise to non-Christians and to the so-called pagan peoples of Africa. This achievement is a huge part of his legacy. The Irish Church, both clergy and laity, have responded to the various historic initiatives of the Irish diocesan priests, sisters and laity to found or set up missions to the non-Christian and pagan peoples overseas. Examples which took place within 20 years of Father Zimmerman's death include the Missionary Society of St. Columban in June 1918, Columban Sisters in 1921, Holy Rosary Sisters in March 1924, St. Patrick's Missionary Society Kiltegan in March 1932, and the Medical Missionaries of Mary in 1937. Many of them, like the SMA, now have members from the very countries they went to evangelize. The work of evangelization continues.